I think the key thing is the playfulness as an attribute as a protective factor for mental health problems, and understanding that not just for children but across the lifespan as well. And I guess, understanding over, the past two generations, significant changes in play culture and play behaviours, and how that impacts on, subsequent generations' parenting, and, parents' experience of play impacting on their relationship and the opportunities they provide for their children. For a lot of children, the impact on social skills, so their ability to connect with their peers, for example, at school. If children have, for whatever reasons, whether that be mental health difficulties, anxiety, social anxiety, or whether that be other disability factors, ASD, for example, or ADHD, where social cues are kind of misread, and how that impacts on their relationships and their ability to join in a group. I think we sometimes forget about the play skills for those children and understand how we can both assess and support that. So I'm curious more about how we can focus more on play assessment, play as an intervention, as well as play goals as an outcome. Well, from IC, I always ask what children's play preferences are, what they like doing, what they're good at, what makes them proud. And I think it's really important to explore those things, not just focus on what the referral problem is. It can be an intimidating environment and hard for children to kind of open up, and young people. I think understanding all of the whole child, their strengths as well as the challenges that they're having. So I guess from that assessment point, getting a sense of what they like doing, what they're good at doing, what they want to do, but also perhaps what they may have once done or long to do, whether that's on their own or with their friends or with, a parent or a, carer or significant other. So really trying to get a sense of their own goals for activity as much as for the feeling stuff. Yeah, I guess I use that information to try and draw on what choice of resources or materials that I might use in a session, even making my own resources or co-making something with a child, something that they would respond to. I know a lot of staff use play as a reward for doing talking business, and I think trying to be playful, using humour in the session, is an important part of working playfully, as much as, I guess, as rapport building, but also trying to develop that playfulness skill, as part of the business, not separate from the business. Well, I'm thinking of a boy, 8-year-old Aboriginal boy, who's experienced a lot of trauma and grief and possibly has some learning difficulties like dyslexia or something. He chose a game, so I don't consider games play. When I talk about play, I mean pure child-centred, child-directed play. But I'm still in the early stages of work with this boy. He chose this Ben 10 game, which I'd never played before. So part of the session is, I guess, around giving him some, control as well. So I guess the playful element that we brought into the game was I was proposing the toy that he brought in with him be part of the game. So we had a third player who was his toy. So trying to introduce that pretend play element, and not necessarily silliness, but expanding the richness of the game through introducing pretend elements into it. Oh, he really got into it. He really liked that idea and set it up. And something that occurred during our session that I otherwise wouldn't have noticed was his... so he's teaching me the games. I wasn't in the instructions for the games. So And he modified them a bit during the play. And I'd given him the control to do that. So I guess sometimes you might want to develop a child's ability to follow the rules, but that's not play in itself. So being play focused, just going with the flow, with what he was creating. So he had wanted all of us, me, him, and the toy, to win cards in this game. And so as he was recognising that the toy wasn't winning, he was modifying how we played to set it up so this toy would win some cards. And I thought that was just a generous act. You know, it was explicitly demonstrating his values around compassion and kindness and fairness and justice. And his mum was watching the session, and that was really lovely for her to see that, because this is a boy who's really struggled to fit in at school, who mum says has been described as the naughty Aboriginal kid. And he's got all these beautiful, lovely qualities that she sees at home with him helping with the siblings and you know, this kind, compassionate boy who we see in sessions that they haven't been seeing at school. So it was a really beautiful opportunity to, you know, explicitly kind of see that play out in this game. Yeah. There's more and more evidence that coming out around the importance of being in the outdoors and the impact of our physical environment on our mental health, not just our physical health. And I think for a long time, outdoor activity has been linked to cardiovascular health, but more and more they're looking at mental health outcomes. So, so I guess, you know, inherently the natural environment, not just through outdoor exercise or activity, but just inherently being in a beautiful location can help bring about peace. So, you know, there's a body of work around that stuff, but there's also a lot of work around over this past 2-3 generations. I guess a shift in our culture to become more risk adverse and the reduction in the freedoms that children have. One example being the roaming distance from home. So several generations ago, young children could venture, you know, a further distance away from home than young children do now. And so this restrictions on childhood freedoms and time spent unsupervised away from the home outside is being linked to increases in anxiety and problem-solving skills, social negotiation skills, resilience, the whole, I guess, the essence being that children who, I guess, don't have opportunities to develop, you know, in their same age peer groups or multi-age peer groups, testing out some of their boundaries in, you know, away from adult supervision, not having the foundation to then manage that in adolescence when that's a primary developmental stage of adolescence, and really struggling with that. And there's been some strong correlations made between the increase in anxiety and depression in young people with the reduction in childhood freedoms. So historically, that term has been more frequently applied to disadvantaged groups. You know, and this notion, if I go back a step, the notion of the relationship between play and work. So, you know, the play has been talked a lot about in the education sector, and I'm not sure, I think it was the Montessori kind of philosophy around play being the work of children. And I think that notion sets up this idea of play and work being an opposite thing, when in fact there's an American psychiatrist, Brian Sutton Smith, who argues that the opposite of play is not work, it's in fact depression. And when we think of, I think that's a really important concept to think about. And we know that, you know, abuse and other kind of disadvantaged or deprived kind of childhoods contribute to learning and development and social problems. But what we're finding now is that affluent, you know, families are also experiencing this play deprivation through changes in play behaviours, becoming more indoors, more sedentary, and time spent more on structured, supervised activities, not self-directed, child-centred kind of freedom activities. It's a really tricky space at the moment. I feel really constrained by, a clinical setting. Recently I was involved with a project with Headspace where they had this idea of setting up a sensory room. And what I was advocating for was to look at revamping a little outdoor courtyard space. So rather than changing a clinic room, using that space to create a really like a sensory kind of calming environment with natural elements. Because the research says around interior design, using natural elements creates a calming space. So why not develop the real outdoor natural element space? So that was in that setting. In this setting, we don't have that space. And, I've had ideas about perhaps removing 2 of the car parks and creating a little outdoor space, or, other ideas that are outside of my control to make that happen. So what I've tried to do is bring natural elements into clinic rooms using driftwood bark, shells, stones, making mindfulness jars. A lot of the mindfulness children's books talk about these glitter jars. I don't know if you've seen those before. Yeah. So rather than using glitter and paint, using sand, shells and stones to in things that we make and use. So we use a lot of plastic stuff in our art and craft stuff. So really looking at the choices, rather than using plastic beads, using wooden beads if we're making a dream weaver or a key ring or something that might have some, concrete, signification of a concept we might be working with. Using more natural materials. I try to. Sometimes families, carers are just overwhelmed by the stress in their lives, and I guess I'm trying to work with parents and carers not so much around adding an activity into their schedule, but thinking about how they can do something they already do differently. Whether that's taking a different route home from school, if they're walking to school, or spending a bit more time in the backyard than inside. But I think it's a tricky one because it's hard for people to think about fitting something extra into their day. So just, thinking about how they can do what they do already, maybe differently. I think being activity-based helps bridge that gap, or helps develop some rapport and comfort, or create safety. I guess that's the key thing. If families don't feel safe, they're not going to talk. So creating safety and doing that through activity and responding to the preferences and interests of children, I think helps with that process. I guess some of the aims of our talking therapy is around psychological flexibility, and children can learn that through testing out their ideas in actually doing things. So I think learning through doing and developing insight through doing can be really powerful. The doing task can be anything really. And I think when we create an object through a creative process, whether that be a little sculpture or a arty crafty activity, that can then be a concrete externalization of some feeling or concept that is easier to talk about than themselves directly. So, whether it be a scene in a sand tray or a cartoon, plot of a story, we can, deconstruct those things and relate them back to that child's personal experiences and thoughts to help them develop some links and insights that are harder to get to just by talking. It's definitely mixed. Some adolescents and adults too really enjoy the invitation to do something that might be perceived to be a little more childish, and others don't want to kind of feel the stigma of doing something that they perceive to be childish. So again, I think it's tapping into what the interests are of that person, and and developing that. I think not all kind of creative, expressive things are childish. You know, we work. I think the key is to finding something that connects with what is motivating to that person. There's an OT, Karen Stegnetti, who has done a lot of work in play, and she's now developed a play assessment tool for adolescents. And so her research over a long period of time has been around pretend play with younger children. And what she's developed in adolescence is like a little movie script. So it's still looking at the skills and ideas of pretend play, but not so much with objects, but in a script for a film. Or you could even use, you could make a film with people or objects, but it's perceived to be less childish because it's using more advanced technology, and it's there are filmmakers everywhere, so it's cooler to be a filmmaker than to play with dolls so much, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I think it's really exciting to see the development of new play assessment tools for older age groups, and because there's lots of evidence that says play is important across the lifespan. And again, as adults, I think, for a long time I had this idea of work-life balance being, work, rest and play. I used to call it the Mars bar principle. You remember that ad? Yeah. But it's not. Like, we can be playful at work. In fact, being playful at work helps us be more resilient. And if we can give children more opportunities to develop playfulness, we can help them develop that resilience, which they might be struggling with. Absolutely. I think if we take ourselves and each other too seriously, we can create barriers, and I think play and playfulness and humour is really important in just being human and making authentic connections with people. We do stressful work, and I think we need to, it can help us cope with that when we have good, trusting relationships and when we can have a bit of fun at the same time.